The summer I first saw him, the city was steaming, the streets sweating under a sky that wouldn't blink. I had just moved into a sixth-floor walk-up that smelled like coffee grounds and old paint, and every window clattered when the trains chiseled past. He arrived with the rain, the first in weeks, thin, vertical lines stitching the night to the earth. He stood beneath the awning of the deli across from my building, pale coat, darker eyes, a stillness that drank the storm. Anyone else might have been just another stranger waiting out bad weather, but there was a precision to him, a way he organized himself against the chaos. Even the raindrops seemed to miss him. We met because of the cat. Mine, an indignant orange tyrant named Fitz, decided to goose-step out the door as I brought up a bag of groceries. The cat shot across the hall like a bolted promise, down the stairs, and straight into traffic if not for the man under the awning, who bent with reflexes like a memory. One hand, quick, delicate, scooped Fitz out of the stream of a mess of tires and horns. When he handed Fitz to me, I saw that his palm was faintly luminescent, as if he cupped a shard of moonlight. He hid it quickly in his coat sleeve. "Thank you," I said, breathless. "I owe you." "Debts are just weather," he said softly, a curious cadence to his words. "They pass if you wait." He introduced himself as Cal. He had no last name, or maybe he did and chose to leave it where the rain couldn't wash it away. He moved into the building down the block, 4th floor, the one with the crooked mailbox and the ivy that refused to die. Over the next weeks he appeared on my periphery, at the farmer's market, touching a basil leaf as if testing the pulse of the earth, at the laundromat, watching the dryer spin like a galaxy in a tin drum, on the subway, head tilted in the tunnel wind, eyes closed as if listening to a frequency too low for human ears. His questions were small and angled, like hooks. What is the taste of winter? Why do pigeons never forget their maps? If a story is told to no one, does it still change the teller? I should have noticed then that he was studying, collecting, arranging. But I was lonely in the way a city makes you lonely, always surrounded, seldom seen. Cal saw. He knew when I would reach for my keys before I did, when the kettle would begin singing, when Fitz would choose the computer keyboard as his throne. His presence made the scaffolding of my days feel deliberate, almost elegant. We became a pattern, twilight walks to the piers, cheap coffees with heavy lids, midnight conversations on my fire escape where the city hummed like a beast asleep. He was careful with his words and careful with me. We never touched more than you touch a friend, and yet I felt kept. Once, he took my hand to show me a constellation. His skin was cool. For a second, everything around us, sirens, laughter, the dim roar of a train crossing the river, seemed to drop away. I remember thinking that his fingers felt like the first moment after a fever breaks. "Where are you from?" I asked one night, a question I had asked a dozen times. "North," he said. "And south. And other directions you do not use." "Very funny. Is it?" He said he worked nights, consulting. He said he was writing a book. He said he was between things. I recognized the thinness of those answers because I had used them myself. We came from the same country, it seemed, the province of evasions. Autumn arrived like a revelation. The city unbuttoned, the air grew intelligent. Cal learned the names of trees faster than I did. He named birds by their shadows. He could stand in a crowd and map its intentions, reading its motion like tides. It was a trick I grew to rely on. Where should we sit? I'd ask, and he'd tip his chin toward the one bench no one would choose for 10 minutes, as if he had an arrangement with time. I didn't notice that whenever we ran into a certain kind of stranger, Cal's focus sharpened. A woman with a pin of 2 interlocked circles. A man who tapped 3 times on the elevator rail. 2 kids whose voices flattened when they asked directions, precise vowels that didn't belong to anyone in the neighborhood. After those encounters, Cal always steered us elsewhere, into light or away from it. I thought he was simply cautious. I thought he was, like me, anxious. The first hint that he wasn't what I believed came in a small failure. We were walking late, talking about dreams. I told him mine were full of doors that opened into the same room. He said, "Doors are agreements." I laughed. A rat skittered across our path. Cal flinched. Not a normal flinch. In the slice of a second, his eyes dithered, like static, then refocused. He steadied, looked down at his hands, and flexed them once as if recalibrating the idea of fingers. We pretended it hadn't happened. Humans do that. We curate reality until it fits inside our pockets. We kept walking, and the river threw its silver skin over the city. Under the bridge, a fisherman's radio murmured a ballad up through the girders. Cal hummed along with a harmony that made the air prickly, the hair at the nape of my neck standing up in a neat salute to something enormous and invisible. That night, I dreamed of rain falling upward. Winter stretched the streets into long spells of bone. On the coldest night, when the sky rang like glass, Cal knocked on my door without texting. Fitz bristled and then sauntered over, as if greeting someone he'd known since before there were windows. Cal stood in the threshold holding a little, hexagonal thing that ticked faintly and smelled like snow. "I need help," he said, and in the fracture of his voice I finally heard the distance he carried. "It is a small thing. It is a long thing. It is a promise." I told him to come in. I told him I'd put water on for tea. I told him everything people tell each other when they don't know the weight of what they're agreeing to carry. He set the hexagon on my table. It unfolded like an iris. What I saw shouldn't have been possible, but it unfolded anyway, a thin, translucent map that wasn't a map, a field of glittering points that rearranged themselves when Cal touched them. I could smell the ocean. I could hear a language that might have been music. I felt the precise shame of someone eavesdropping on a prayer. "It is only a tool," he said softly. "Like a compass. Or a debt. What are you?" He didn't look up. "A guest." "You mean, immigrant?" He smiled without humor. "I mean guest." And then, steadily, as if opening a door in a room with no walls, he told me a version of the truth. He had come down in a storm, 17 years and 3 months ago, on a night a transformer blew 6 neighborhoods away and turned the skyline into a jagged heartbeat of blue. He had come tasked with observation, with fitting, with finding certain thresholds that opened only under human eyes. Not to invade, he said. Not to conquer. To understand. To measure the heat you make when you love each other. To map the folds of your refusal and the angles of your hope. To identify, finally, a single person who could be brought to a place where 2 realities touched and ask a particular question on a particular day. "And what question is that?" I asked, my mouth dry. "That," he said, "is the part that changes the answer." He closed the map. The room dimmed. The kettle clicked off. Outside, the city breathed frost. Inside, the air hung heavy with words we weren't ready to speak. "Why me?" I asked, and hated, immediately, the way those 2 words begged. He considered. "There is a way your voice moves when you speak to yourself." I nodded, which is to say I fell, slowly, through the floor and back up again. Fitz leapt into Cal's lap and made an odd, contented sound I'd never heard. Cal stroked him once, and something flickered along the cat's spine, a brief, silver shoal of light, dawned before I could trust it. "Let me help," I said, knowing I already had. Cal looked at me in a way I would someday understand as pity dressed as gratitude. "You already do," he said, and the hexagon ticked on, counting down a clock only he could read. By spring, the city healed into color. Trees shook out small fists of green. Children collided in parks like rogue atoms. Street vendors returned with their patient offerings, pretzels, knockoff sunglasses, mangoes on sticks bright as warnings. Cal walked among all of it with a precise attention that made the world feel newly minted. I started to notice how he deferred to gravity, how he wouldn't set a glass down, he would usher it, following the last centimeter with his fingertips. How he paused on stairwells like a climber measuring the mountain's breadth. How he listened to thunder with his eyes. We talked more about the hexagon. He called it the lumen. It translated without translating. It compressed distances until they touched. It could describe a person in sums, heat signatures, breath. Intervals, the intervals between lies and truths, the signature of fear when it turns into courage. He never let me touch it, but he let me watch it work, and the watching changed me. A person can be pulled into a task by degrees, like a tide claiming sand one breath at a time. He asked me to accompany him as he mapped gate places, spots where reality thinned, where a voice spoken at the right hour might echo into more than air. Old churches, yes, but also underpasses. Storage units. The alley behind a defunct cinema whose marquee still promised a summer that never came. There were patterns. He wouldn't speak them aloud. Naming is a kind of stealing, he said once, when I pressed too hard. Sometimes it is a mercy. Sometimes it is a crime. I met his others, though I did not know they were his. A florist who always had one bouquet that never wilted. A bike messenger who never got caught by lights. A teacher whose classroom clock ran 5 minutes slow but landed every student on time. They looked at me with a recognition that had nothing to do with my face. I felt ushered along a corridor with doors I couldn't see. We grew close in a way that refused ordinary categories. He learned my father's old jokes and told them back with just enough error to make me laugh. I learned his silences. We walked in companionable quiet for miles even when my feet blistered. We ate soup at a place with a single, shining ladle. We watched old movies whose spaceships looked like tin toys, and I watched his face watch them, a complicated choreography of affection, sadness, and a hunger that wasn't for food. But the work had an edge. I began to see that our path was choreographed. We were never late for trains. We arrived at corners as lights turned. We found back doors propped open and rooftops with views that had been waiting for us. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. I had the recurring thought that we were ants walking along a line of sugar, admiring the glitter without looking up at the hand that poured it. One afternoon, in a disused library, I lost my temper. We were measuring the slit of a light shaft, the way dust moved through it in visible currents. Cal was murmuring to the lumen. I said, "Am I a volunteer or a vessel? Do you trust me, or am I just useful?" He didn't look up. Those are not exclusive. Say the part you're not saying. He did look up then, and something gentled in his face. I do trust you. But I was asked to accomplish a thing. I have been at it a long time. I am close. And the thing is what, exactly? He did not answer. That was an answer. We did what close friends do, we forgave each other enough to continue. That night, on the fire escape, he told me a story. Where he's from, not a planet, he insisted, not as we define it, more like a field of agreement. They send envoys to places like ours because the distance between what is and what is hoped for is measurable there. They come with strict rules. Observe. Influence as little as possible. Do not attach. He had broken all 3. This he said simply, without the theater of confession. His voice was the sound of a door closing somewhere very far away. Why? I asked. Because you are good, he said, at being broken and becoming more afterward. Flatterer. Student, he corrected. I asked him then what the particular question was, the one I might be asked to speak at a gate place. He hedged. It would be simple, he said, and the simplicity would be a cruelty. It would be about what I valued when I had to choose between 2 things that looked like one. He tried to make a metaphor. He failed. He tried again. He failed better. We let it go. In May, a man knocked on my door. He wore a suit slick as oil and a tie with a subtle, repeating geometry. He introduced himself as Jonas. He had the affability of a preacher and the eyes of a tailor measuring a stubborn client. He said he was an old friend of Cal's. He said Cal was late to a meeting they'd waited years to hold, and would I please tell him Jonas had come to collect. I didn't invite him in. Something about him made my teeth itch. I texted Cal, who arrived 3 minutes later, having crossed a distance that should have taken 8. When Cal saw Jonas, he stepped between us like a shield. "Go," Jonas said, "not to me." "No," Cal said. They stood, the air between them suddenly cold. Fitz hid under the couch with a growl I'd never heard, a small storm stuffed into fur. "What's happening?" I asked. Jonas smiled at me, a smile that had been tested in mirrors. "You're lovely," he said, like a doctor commenting on the weather. "You've done very well." "For what?" "Calibration," Jonas said. "Thank you." Cal's voice was calm. "Leave." "For now," Jonas said, and did, with the inertia of an answer already written. I asked questions. Cal closed himself like a fist. He paced my small kitchen in precise lines, as if trying and failing to draw a circle. He said Jonas was an envoy like him, older, sent before. He said Jonas had adapted too well. Power was a gravity too. He said that sometimes a mission becomes a palace. That sometimes the palace consumes the mission. He said the gateplay schedule had moved. He said the city had begun listening back. The next weeks felt like running without moving. We visited 3 gate places in one night and found none. We slept in shifts and dreamed in the other's sentences. Cal grew thinner at the edges, like a photograph left in a window. He could stand absolutely still for 10 minutes and then burst into motion that blurred, as if time had become uneven under his feet. On a humid night in June, we climbed the arms of a decommissioned radio tower on the edge of the water. The metal was warm. The river clutched the shore. The sky was a complicated bruise. Cal touched the lumen and it woke with a soft astonishment, prisms unfurling like petals. The air around us turned articulate. I could taste metal. I could feel the tower making its old, remembered argument. With the sky. He turned to me with that careful, almost tender gaze I had come to crave. "It's here," he said. "At last." "What do I do?" He told me, "Stand where the lines crossed. Speak when the world inhaled. Wait for the question, which would sound like my own voice and not like it at all. Answer truthfully." Do not look at him while I did. "Why not?" "Because you'll change your answer to save me," he said, and then he touched my face as if committing topography to memory. "And that would ruin everything." I stood where he pointed. The metal hummed. The sky unzipped. Wind rose from nowhere and everywhere. The lumen ticked into a new rhythm I felt in my teeth. A quiet came that wasn't silence. The city tilted. In that hush, a voice formed, not in my ears, but in the place where fear and love share a border. It asked me a question so simple it hurt: if a stranger could live because your friend would die, would you let the stranger live? It was like swallowing fire. Behind my eyes, 1,000 images. My father, laughing. Fitz, asleep. Cal, standing with his hands loose at his sides, as if surrender were a posture he'd practiced. The strangers I'd never meet. The ones I already adored without knowing their names. The pause was a lifetime made small enough to hold. "Yes," I said finally, my tongue numb. "The stranger lives." The air flickered, not like lightning, more like a page turning in a book the size of the night. The tower creaked. The river caught its breath. Then a second question arrived, as easy and cruel as the first: if your friend could live because a city would die, would you let your friend live? "No," I said, faster, the word a stone. The hush softened. The wind returned. The sky stitched itself. The city exhaled. The lumen folded itself down to a single, patient shape. I turned to Cal. He was crying. I had never seen him do that. The tears weren't wet. They glittered and lifted, like dust motes obeying a private law, and then were gone. "Thank you," he said, as if I had set him free. Or sentenced him. Behind him, on the catwalk, stood Jonas. "Right on time," Jonas said. "We're finished here." We didn't run, because running would have admitted a truth neither of us wanted. Jonas walked forward with the confidence of a man whose lines are memorized by the world. He glanced at the lumen in Cal's hand and smiled, small and sharp, as if reminded of a minor victory long ago. "2 questions," Jonas said to me. "Did you answer them as yourself?" "As who else?" "As who he wanted you to be," Jonas said, tilting his chin at Cal, "but no matter. The answers hold. The corridor is open." "Corridor?" I asked. The word felt like a draft under a locked door. "Between agreements," Jonas said. "Between what is permitted and what is possible. Between our field and yours." He touched the tower rail, affection and contempt braided in his fingertips. "Do you know how long we sought a voice that would answer that way without bargaining? A lifetime longer. Then yours," he added gently. Cal moved between us. "You don't decide how the corridor is used. You broke your instructions. You attached," Jonas said, almost fond. "Your preferences are now liabilities. Step aside." Cal didn't. Jonas sighed. He raised his right hand, not as a threat but as a bureaucrat would, checking a watch. The air thickened. My ears popped. Fitz, miles away, must have lifted his head. Cal's stance shifted. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked like something he hadn't let me see. Not larger, leaner. Not brighter, truer. He spoke in a voice that made the metal under my feet ring. It was a single word that I can't write down because your alphabet has no letter for it. The effect was immediate. Jonas winced, his composure shearing. The tower shuddered, as if remembering the weight of all the broadcasts it had ever slung across darkness. "Stop," Jonas said, and for a moment he wasn't a collector but a supplicant. "You don't know what will unravel." "That is the point," Cal said. "To untie the wrong knot." Everything after that felt inevitable and impossible. They argued in physics and memories. They used grammar like a blade. When Jonas reached for the lumen, the air rippled. When Cal shifted his weight, the city lights blinked in a synchronized flinch. Eventually Jonas smiled again, a tired man remembering his favorite quiet violence, and said, "You think she will not have to pay? You think there is a version of this story where you carry all the costs and she carries none?" Cal glanced back at me then, a fraction, and in that fraction Jonas moved. His hand grazed the lumen. The hexagon hiccuped open. The world yawed. A seam in the night tore and revealed a corridor, not a hallway but a geography, 2 mirrors facing each other, reflections smaller and smaller until they were needles threading themselves. The air smelled like copper and the first day in a new house. Sound thin to a needle too. I had the presence of mind to grip the rail. Cal did not fall. Jonas did not, either. What did fall were things without names, flickers of potential that brushed my skin and made my mouth taste like forgotten words. Some part of me wanted to step forward and disappear. Some part of me knew that would be exactly what someone else wanted. "Close it," Cal told me. "Say the word you said before." "Yes," I said, because I didn't understand. The corridor dimmed but did not shut. He shook his head, urgent. I realized then that the answer alone mattered. The content of that answer mapped the device's attention. The corridor was listening for an ethic, not a syllable. "No," I said, and felt the machine lean away, like a dog refusing a command it finally understood to be unkind. The seam stitched halfway closed. Jonas hissed. We walked down carefully. The world re-waited. At the tower's base, the river slapped the pilings as if it were bored of our drama. Jonas followed, not interfering, eyes narrow and thoughtful. At the sidewalk. He touched my sleeve with 2 fingers, light and cool. You've changed him, he said, almost admiring. You've cost us years. But the current still runs in one direction. Be careful what debts you enjoy paying. I don't owe you anything. He smiled. That's never true. He left with the particular absence of someone who could erase footprints without erasing dust. I turned to Cal. He looked hollowed but steady, a bell after the strike. What happens now? I asked. We wait for the next door, at the appointed hour, he said. And we decide whether we walk through it first or burn it. We tried to live like people for a while. There were groceries. There was laundry. Fitz discovered a new nap geometry that made him look like a spilled sun. We fenced our fear with jokes. We failed often. Cal stood at windows as if windows could teach him how to stay. He tracked heat lightning as if reading a script. He spoke less. When he did, his words landed heavier, as if gravity had noticed him and wanted more. The next door opened in a hospital stairwell at 3 in the morning. We were there because I volunteered nights and knew the banality of miracles in that building. The light in the stairwell bent, just briefly, and the echo of a distant gurney will stuttered the pattern Cal had been waiting to hear for 17 years. He took out the lumen. It warmed in his palm. He said my name like a promise. We found the crossing on the second landing. It was small, not dramatic, a patch of air that felt softer than the air around it, as if a hand had pressed gently on the world and left a warmth. Cal set the lumen in the corner of the step. It unfurled. The soft, articulate hush returned. The question did too, the first one, the one about the stranger and the friend. I answered again. The air nodded. Then the corridor wrote itself. It was narrower than before, shimmering like heat above blacktop. It smelled like rain. It sounded like distance learning its own name. Cal stepped forward, then stopped. He looked at me in a way that made my ribs tighten, as if he were already on the other side. I have to go through, he said. If Jonas does first, he will anchor it to the wrong agreement. He will feed his palace. How long will you be gone? He shook his head. We don't measure it that way. For you, minutes. For me, maybe a lifetime. Maybe less. Maybe more. I laughed because the alternative was a sound with too many teeth. And then you come back. If I can. And if you can't. Then you will live, he said, like a benediction and a command. Footsteps sounded above us. A nurse humming. A custodial cart squeaking. The world, dutiful, proceeding. Cal reached out and took my hand, a pressure so sure it held me together. He leaned in, not to kiss me, but to rest his forehead against mine. There is a word where I'm from, he murmured. It means, to be the reason a bridge exists while knowing it will never be your road. I don't want to be that word, I said, and felt the truth of it burn my tongue. I know, he said. But you are. He stepped forward. I followed without thinking. The corridor admitted him with a sigh, like a lock accepting a key. It rejected me gently, like water holds a leaf at the surface. He looked back one last time, and in that look was everything people write novels to avoid saying out loud. Wait, I said. For what? For you to come back. He smiled then, truly smiled, and it was terrible because it contained mercy. You always speak like that, he said. As if time is a room we can decorate. Then he was gone. The seam closed like a thought changing its mind. The stairwell air was ordinary again. The lumen lay on the step, quiet and small, as if it had never been anything else. I sat there until a doctor asked if I was lost. I realized that the answer to that would always be both yes and no. Days thickened and slid. I checked the stairwell every night at 3. Nothing. I carried the lumen in the pocket of a coat that suddenly felt older than me. Fitz waited at the door every evening, which made me forgive and resent him in the same breath. I spoke Cal's name in rooms that didn't deserve to hold it. The city performed its tender violences and its miraculous cruelties with the oblivious grace of a river wearing down a stone. On the 7th night, the seam opened in the reflection of a window, not the window itself. It was sloppy, as if the world had been rushed. The smell of copper again, strong this time. I put the lumen on the sill. It warmed, and then, like a hand coming up from deep water, Cal stepped through. He looked the same and not the same. The edges of him held light oddly, as if light had learned a new verb and was practicing it on him. His eyes had a depth that made the room feel small. He smiled and it cut me to pieces. "Hi," he said, the word a miracle of ordinary. I reached for him and stopped. He shook his head, as if reminding me of a rule I'd once known. "Not yet. It's not finished." "What isn't?" He hesitated, and in that hesitation lived every disaster. "The corridor stabilized," he said. "Jonas found a way to anchor it without your voice. He used mine." "Is that bad?" "It means choice is over. It means a door stays a door even when the house is burning. What do we do?" He looked toward the city, listening to frequencies I could not. "We close it. For good." "And how?" He looked at me then with a sorrow so reverent it felt like prayer. "With the cost I was sent to calculate." The plan was so simple it felt like a lie: open the corridor at the widest gate place and scar it on the way shut. Not a wound that would kill, Cal insisted, but a scar that would make it honest. A door that remembers being burned is harder to mistake for a miracle. The widest gate place was not a cathedral or a monument. It was a commuter tunnel beneath the river, where the breath of thousands had polished the air. He shook into a board, lines strung between them in taut geometries, the tunnel vibrating with a resonance that had been waiting since before I was born. We went at dawn. Morning divided the city into those who marched toward paychecks and those who had made strange bargains with the dark. We belonged to neither group. We were a two-person country with a fragile constitution. In the tunnel, lights flickered with the petty cruelty of fluorescent bulbs. The river pressed its weight above us. The lumen thrummed in Cal's hand, impatient. He placed it against a steel panel stamped with a serial number as arbitrary and sacred as a psalm. The hush arrived, carrying the scent of rain the tunnel had never seen. People flowed past us without seeing. The corridor rose like a mirage that didn't care whether you believed in it. "Stand with me," Cal said, and I did, because the body knows when promises are both impossible and required. He unfolded the lumen into shapes that made my eyes water to look at. He spoke in that other grammar. The seam widened. Somewhere far from us, Jonas felt it, I'm sure. Somewhere below us, the river clenched. "Now," Cal said, and in that one word lived 17 years of waiting and 7 nights of ache. "Say the 2 answers again." "Yes, then no, in that order." "Simple and cruel." I said them. The corridor steadied and then, something else happened. The lumen began to hum out of tune, as if a second device had joined the conversation. Jonas stepped from the moving crowd as if peeled from it, not arriving so much as deciding to be visible. He held his own lumen, sleeker, darker, predatory. He inclined his head in greeting to me, the way a thief salutes the person who bought the lock he learned to pick when he was a child. "You're late," he told Cal. "I am not yours to schedule," Cal said. "Everyone is someone's," Jonas said, and then, to me, "You don't need to be here for this part." "I think I do," I said. Jonas sighed, genuinely regretful. "That's what happens when you let them love you. They insist on standing where the glass will fall. Anger quieted me. Quiet anger is useful. I listened. The two devices spoke to one another in measures and memories. The seam widened and then jutted. People streamed past, oblivious, a river ignoring a knife. What happens if it stays open? I asked. Jonas smiled. Wonderful things. Terrible things. All the honest things you've been telling stories to avoid. A city unmoored from its lies. Also, Cal said quietly, predation. If a door stays a door, the house fills with weather. Poetic, Jonas said. And irrelevant. We built palaces before your rules went brittle. You mistake a palace for a promise, Cal said. No, Jonas said, and his voice turned almost tender, I mistake your mercy for progress. He raised his lumen. The seam brightened until I had to squint. Air folded like silk in a clever hand. Cal moved to counter. For a second, everything held. Two men who were not men, two devices that were not devices, a door that wanted to be a road and a scar at the same time. Then Jonas shifted attention from Cal to me. He did not touch me. He did not need to. He simply turned his face toward me with a professional interest that made me feel catalogued. In that instant, the corridor listened to me more than it listened to him. He knew it. He counted on it. The seam flared, aligning with my pulse. Tell me, Jonas said, calm as weather, if a city could live because one person you love would not, would you allow it? It was the question again, but bent. I wanted to say the right thing. I wanted the right thing to be the thing that saved us. Words rose, yes, no, the stranger, the friend, the city, the bridge, the cost, the window. I looked at Cal and remembered his warning. Do not look at me while you answer. I looked at the seam instead. In it was a landscape my body remembered without ever having seen. Yes, I said, because I had already said it before and because changing answers to save someone is a way to lose them and yourself. The seam steadied for Jonas. Cal moved faster than gravity. He put himself between the seam and me, not physically, the physics were different here, but ethically, the only way that matters. He took my answer and placed it where it would do the least harm to the most people. Jonas hissed. He pivoted tactics. You were sent to measure the cost, Jonas said to Cal, you talk as if numbers can be kind. Finish your assignment. Cal looked at him the way tidal water looks at a rope. I have. The cost is this, a single life, freely given, in the place where the door believes the world is kind. I went cold so quickly it felt like falling through ice. The lumen in Cal's hand brightened, then steadied, as if agreeing. Jonas smiled, as if a dog had finally sat on command. Whose life? I asked, though I knew. Cal turned to me and did not lie. Mine. The breath I had been holding for months left my body. I reached for his arm. He stepped back, gentle, and the gesture said what his face could not, if you touch me now, you will undo me. Jonas rolled a shoulder, easing a gorgeous and unnecessary pain. Make it quick, he said, almost bored. There's a timetable. Cal ignored him. He took a step closer to the seam. The light from it painted his face in an older geometry. He looked at me, holding steadier than I was. The crowd flowed around us, indifferent and perfect, a chorus that refused to sing. Listen, Cal said, and the word wrapped around my bones. I will not die in the way you fear. Where I'm from, we say a story changes rooms. I will go into another room. You will keep speaking. Don't, I said. It was a bad sentence, small and mean and insufficient. I have been your guest, he said, and your student. You have been my teacher and my home. Thank you. He smiled then, and this smile was not terrible. It was human, all the way down. This is not your fault. Jonas cleared his throat. Enough. Cal turned. Something passed between them that was a farewell and a refusal. He placed the lumen against his chest. He spoke the word our letters cannot hold. The seam pulled at him gently, like fabric wanting its thread. He began to fade, not vanish, to brighten, not burn, to go quiet in a way that made every loud thing in the world kneel. Wait, I said, and put my hand where his had been, against the metal panel. What if the cost is mine? Jonas laughed, delighted. Ah, the grand gesture. See. They always insist on standing where the glass will fall. Cal's eyes flashed fear for the first time. No. The door will take you and braid you into the wrong promise. It knows your voice too well. It will spend you badly. I decide how I'm spent, I said, and felt, for a thrilling second, made of granite. He shook his head. This is the arithmetic I cannot change. If you pay, the palace stands. If I pay, the palace burns. The seam wanted him. I wanted to break the world's fingers. I wanted to rewrite every rule. Instead I did what humans do when they love someone and the choice is simple and cruel. I stood very still so he could go without being pulled into the wrong gravity. I memorized his face because I had no other weapon against forgetting. I said the smallest prayer I know, please. He stepped forward. The light folded him as if he were a page the story required to turn. For a heartbeat, his outline held, a man assembled by rain. He looked back. Tell Fitz I know he's not a cat, he said, smiling crooked, and then he was gone. The seam closed with a gentle, absolute sound. The lumen emptied itself of light and went dark, a quiet coin. The air smelled like after. People kept walking. Jonas stood very still, and for the first time, looked older than the suit that armored him. It's done, he said, reverent and bored at once. Congratulations. You saved your city. We'll see what it does with the favor. He turned to leave. Fury found me with the accuracy of a homing bird. Is the palace burned? I asked. Jonas paused. He glanced at the spot where Cal had been. He nodded, once. Charred, at least. Enough to remind the next carpenter to build with honest hands. And you? He smiled. Palaces are portable. So are rules. He stepped into the crowd and dissolved. The tunnel's light steadied. Somewhere, a child laughed. Somewhere else, a siren. The ordinary world returned with its ordinary tyrannies. I stood with the coin-quiet lumen in my palm and discovered that grief has both weight and buoyancy. It drags you down while teaching you to breathe deeper. I went home. Fitz met me at the door and looked at me with pupils like eclipsed suns. He butted his head against my knee, then jumped onto the table and curled around the dark lumen as if it were an egg he intended to hatch. Months unspooled. The city did not know it had been saved. That's how cities are. They assume the absence of disaster is the baseline rather than the result of someone's private furnace burning all night. But here and there, I saw changes. The alley behind the defunct cinema finally caved and was turned into a garden. The hospital stairwell clock fixed itself. The old radio tower lost 2 rungs and gained a view kinder to knees. Sometimes, very early, I would wake to the smell of rain with no rain falling. I would hear, faintly, a harmony beneath the subway's roar. I would feel, in the bones of the building, the particular hush of a closed door remembering. On those mornings, I would say his name, once, into the apartment. The air would hold it and then give it back. The betrayal happened slowly enough to look like weather. It began with small wrongnesses. A corner store that had been open every day for 30 years was suddenly closed on Tuesdays, but only for me. A bus route shifted 2 blocks, but the map did not. An elevator skipped my floor, then returned when I spoke aloud to it as if it were sulking. Coincidences are just patterns too young to vote. I wrote them down. They drew a shape I didn't like. Then Jonas returned. He did not knock. He was in my kitchen when I came home, the lumen, Cal's lumen, on the table under Fitz's implacable guard. He didn't touch the cat. Smart. You've been busy, he said, looking at the notebook full of wrongnesses. Good. You'll appreciate the design. What design? The corridor didn't close, he said mildly. Not really. Scars heal. Doors forgive. Agreements evolve. I wanted to throw something heavy at his beautiful face. I poured water instead. So, he said, the city is susceptible. It's listening. A suggestion becomes a street. An opinion becomes a law. That sounds like any city. Yes, Jonas said, pleased. Now imagine if the suggestions were curated. You. Not only me, he said, and from his pocket he took a pin, 2 interlocked circles, the symbol I'd seen months ago on the woman in the street. A fellowship of people who learn to prefer accuracy over kindness. We will tune your days until they sing. I laughed, a sound with teeth. The palace you said burned. It did, he said. We built a better kitchen in its ashes. He looked at Fitz. Fitz blinked, offended by the concept of others. Your friend paid the toll, Jonas said. Respect that. Don't squander it trying to salt the earth. What do you want? He shrugged. For you to keep doing what you've done. Walk, watch, answer. Your voice opens things. You have a gift for cruelty that is honest. I am not with you, I said. You already are, he said, not unkind. And he knew you would be. It wasn't until he left that I understood how deep the betrayal cut. Not his, he was an instrument playing the song he was tuned for. Cal's. The corridor had needed a cost. He paid it. He closed the palace. But he had also opened a future where my voice could be used as a key by any hand that learned its shape. He had prepared me. He had prepared the city. He had not warned me what kind of harvest might grow in the cleared field. Grief is a bad mathematician. It shows you one sum and hides the rest. I sat with the lumen and tried to do the arithmetic he couldn't. I thought of his face at the last moment. I thought of Jonas's patience. I thought of my answers and the answers I didn't give because I loved someone. The next wrongness was not small. A train that should have stopped kept going. No one was hurt. The news called it a glitch. The corridor hummed in my bones that night, an itch I could scratch only by moving. I went to the old radio tower. The river was tired. The city wore its late summer insomnia like perfume. I climbed as far as the missing rungs allowed. The metal sang its weathered song. Don't, said a voice behind me, and for a second I believed in miracles so hard it hurt. I turned. Not Cal, Jonas. Of course. You don't get to stand where he stood, I said. I have stood worse places, he said. Listen. There is a vote tomorrow that will decide whether the city pretends to fix something instead of fixing it. I intend to push the pretending over the line. It will be elegant. It will soothe. It will become law. People will thank each other for the anesthetic. You're telling me this why? Because you can stop me, he said matter of fact, and I want to see if you will. He held out his lumen. A polite offering. The arrogance was complete. I should have thrown it into the river. Instead I took it, because the part of me that needs to know is louder than the part of me that knows better. The device tasted like static in my hand. I touched its edge, and the city leaned toward me. I could feel the vote's shape. I could see the seams where opinion would be caulked into statute. I could loosen it. I could retune the corridors listening so that when people spoke in that room tomorrow, their words would mean what their mouths claimed. Which would kill the false law. Which would also kill the momentum for the real one later. I could choose a good now and burn a better later. Simple. Cruel. You set me up, I said. You were always standing there, Jonas said. I merely pointed at the floor. I could have walked away. I could have smashed the device. I could have screamed. Instead, I did the arithmetic Cal had taught me without knowing he was teaching. I tuned the corridor not to me, not to Jonas, but to an aggregate of small, stubborn voices, the ones that whisper in checkout lines and write letters no one reads and show up to work in crises and keep unnecessary promises. The seam opened, a thin listening. I placed the vote inside that listening. I removed my own voice from the mix. In the morning, the false law failed by one vote. The true work waited. The city woke with a hangover and drank water. I slept for 13 hours and dreamed of hailstones lined up like soldiers. When I woke, Jonas was in my kitchen again. He looked amused, tired, impressed. Well, he said. You're better at this than he was. Don't, I said softly, and this time the word made him blink. You've become what he needed, Jonas said. That is a kind of betrayal too, you know. I know, I said. And I'm not done yet. He raised his hands as if in a chapel. By all means. He left. I took the 2 lumens, his and Cal's, and placed them on the table. Fitz sat between them, a fulcrum. I spoke the word that breaks the devices into their smallest selves. They did not shatter. They disassembled, like truths turning into stories. I put half of each into a box, then into another box, then into places no one who liked palaces would bother to bend for, the hollow of a tree's elbow, the pocket of a coat at a thrift store, a library return slot with no label. At dusk, the rain began again, gentle as forgiveness. I went to the fire escape. The city breathed. Somewhere, a corridor listened and decided to be a window instead. I spoke aloud, because old habits hold, Cal, I said. If you can hear me, this is the part where I promise to be both kind and accurate, even when it costs. This is the part where I remember you chose to pay so that the questions could stay cruel and simple and ours. This is the part where I don't forgive you yet for not warning me. This is the part where I do anyway. Below, a kid on a bike laughed like a trumpet. Above, thunder counted to a number only it loved. Fitz blinked at the rain and did not move. I went inside and turned on a light. If this is betrayal, then let it be honest. If this is love, then let it be a city's shape. If there are corridors, let them open only for answers that refuse to flatter. If anyone asks what happened to the alien who lived among us for years and years and taught us the arithmetic of doors, tell them this: he left when he needed to, because the cost was his. Tell them I wanted to follow. Tell them I chose the stranger. Tell them the strangest thing of all is how ordinary the world looks, even after you've saved it by letting someone you love die. After the rain stopped, I checked the stairwell. No seam. I fed the cat. I folded laundry. On the table, there was only 1 lumen left, the half made of both of them, humming faintly with a song that did not need words. I placed my hand above it, not touching, and felt a warmth like the first moment after a fever breaks. I held it there until my arm ached, then longer, because sometimes the only way to keep a promise is to let it hurt. Thank you for watching the Quill's journey. If you're enjoying the atmosphere, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear what stood out to you.